Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to another Supatease video. And with the Arena World Championship Cup number 3 having concluded and multiple weeks of frequent small tuning changes, I wanted to do a quick rundown update of my melee DPS tier list, where I think that the specializations are currently sitting in their overall power and potential when it comes to PvP in World of Warcraft. A few thoughts on potential compositions that could redeem some of the specializations that aren't ranked as high at the moment. And I've broken down the tiers a lot better this time around in this tier list. It's going to be a lot more specific as to where I think things are currently lined up as opposed to just S, A, B, and C. There's the little plus to really kind of highlight where I think every spec is sitting individually. What is the current meta? Have the changes really done very much overall, and kind of the deep reasons why some of the specializations are excelling so much. But other than that, let's just get started. We've got Arms Warrior coming up first, and I think very clearly Arms Warrior is in the S tier. The main reason for this, just as an overall approach, is that it's the core of almost every composition at the moment. Everything works with it, and Arms Warrior enables everything else to be amazing. And just because of that alone, you can tell that it's going to be a phenomenal specialization. A lot of its returned utility is making it quite durable. We saw recent nerfs to its commanding shout cooldown, which have impacted its defense a bit, but the major component of Arms Warrior's defense in my mind still lies heavily in the ability Intervene, and Intervene is a very high skill capability, right? However, with the duration that it lasts on the target, basically a warrior will intervene to an ally, redirecting all physical attacks to the warrior. And then what ends up happening is that it lasts so long that, and with conduits that like Safeguards conduit gives it a 25% damage reduction to the target. So it's redirecting 25% reduced damage back to the warrior on top of that, similar to how Sacrifice was working for Paladins, for Holy Paladins with Ultimate Sacrifice. It was getting reduced when it was redirected, so you didn't really have to outplay it too much. And those combined together really enable the warrior to redirect crowd control. They also, which is cool and awesome, and redirect damage, which I also think is cool, is awesome. But I think to me, it's the intervene duration might be too long, and also the 25% reduction to redirected damage might be impacting the outplay potential of that spell, where normally what you would think is going to happen is the warrior redirects damage to themselves, and then, oh, well, let's attack the warrior then, because they're going to be taking redirected damage and direct damage. But because it's reduced through Safeguard, defensive stance, the warrior ends up just being a sponge, and then with Ignore Pain, providing a significant absorption shield. Often that damage is not even seen into the warrior specifically. I think it's this that is really enabling warrior to get up and above a lot of the other melee DPS. Of course, its consistent damage is amazing, bringing Sharpened Blade, heavy mobility with things like the Venthyr Covenant and Charge Execute are all kind of like layers on top of it. In my mind, they're a little bit more unique and a less oppressive than the Intervene specifically. And I'm curious to see if they end up looking at Arms Warrior at all for PvP specific nerfs, because I think that it's still a very interesting spec and has a lot going on and is super fun. It's a spec that I wouldn't want to see totally leveled down to the bottom. But having seen so much of it now, and it's the core of every comp, I think it's pretty obvious that it's deserving of the S tier. And the S tier is going to be a very exclusive tier this time around. I'm not going to be throwing it around very loosely like I may have in previous videos. Assassination Rogue has been receiving buffs over time. It's a specialization that's more consistent pressure. We saw it in the tournaments, although it wasn't as successful. It's a pretty straightforward specialization, and it's pretty basic in essence. You kidney shot your target, you try to use Vendetta while the healer is crowd controlled, and kill the target very fast. You don't have the mobility of Subtlety. You don't have the escape mechanisms and the encouraged playstyle of kind of hitting and then running. You kind of have to stay in, but you don't really do, I want to say you don't really do as much damage, because I felt like in a lot of games, Peekaboo, for example, was keeping up with Arms Warriors on damage overall. I think it's the lack of tools like Intervene, or just the general lack of tools as Assassination. You're very bare bones, kind of just attack the target, just a you can't do very much with the specialization. It didn't receive a significant amount of unpruning to the point where you're going to be able to get all this extra utility and benefit like an arms warrior. It doesn't bring in the hybrid healing either, which is very important at the moment, with how substantial the hybrid healing is, or the class DPS healing in general is. It's not bringing that to the table either. So it's just very straightforward, basic, doesn't have anything particularly to outline about it. But it is somewhat effective, right? Because it's gotten buffed quite a lot. Like 5%, 7%, 8%. I can't remember the numbers exactly because there's so many times that it got buffed slightly in its damage. And because it can still play Rogue Mage Paladin, a phenomenal composition, I think that it is deserving of something like a B+. But it's not going to be as phenomenal as the A or A+ or S tier specializations just because it's so bare bones at the moment. Enhancement Shaman is a specialization we saw a lot more play in the tournament this time around, actually winning the European tournament. And then on the ladder as well, I've even played with Enhancement Shamans myself, and I think that they're actually in a great position. I do wish that other hybrid healing mechanisms were brought down to where Enhancement is currently, where their instant healing is powerful, but if they run out of mana, then they can no longer heal, or they can't purge, or they can't use other utilities. So if they're just dumping all of their heals out, there's going to be a bit of a punishment for that, which the other hybrids don't necessarily feel the impact of. However, the synergies with something like an Arms Warrior really enable it to get into a higher tier ranking in my mind, but not the ultimate highest. I think there's going to be reserved for one hybrid in particular. So for me, it falls a little bit short of the A+. However, its synergies, again, with Arms Warrior, I think are making it a very fearsome opponent, because the Arms Warrior shores up the weaknesses that it has by providing Intervene and providing Spell Reflect and a lot of disruption and all the things that I outlined on the Arms Warrior. But for me, I think it's not an A+ specialization on its own, and you won't necessarily be able to play kind of whatever you want in the game as an Enhancement Shaman, but if you play with an Arms Warrior, you're going to feel great. And with, again, the hybrid healing, your healing surges are substantial. Your Chain Harvest as well for Venthyr Enhancement Shamans is substantial for damage and healing. Ascendance is almost a guaranteed kill button at the moment. Doom Winds is a very effective way to get damage out on a lower cooldown than Ascendance. It's bringing all the things that are necessary to succeed at the moment, which is what is, in my mind, allowing it such a high ranking, but I think its downsides of its mana is holding it back slightly. And now Feral Druid, in my mind, not bringing the downsides of the mana. However, I don't think that we've fully seen the potential of Feral Druid at the moment, because a lot of tournament teams don't have the composition Feral Mage Paladin on their roster particularly. But when this composition is played on the ladder, or Feral Warrior on the ladder is doing very well, and it synergizes with the best specializations, the Arms Warriors or the Fire Mages and the Paladins. And I think that it has a place as a counter, and just overall will be strong in those compositions. A lot of teams are still trying to utilize the Discipline Priest Feral Hunter composition, which in my mind is not up to par to keep up with the amount of off healing available and defense available to a lot of specializations. It can't really cut through that. But if you play with Fire Mages, or you play with Arms Warriors and Paladins, I think you will see success. And these are compositions that I think it's just tournament teams haven't invested any time into, because these comps haven't generally been good in the past in tournaments, but it doesn't mean that they aren't currently good. So for me, I think that it ranks it higher than Enhancement Shaman. And the main reason for this is that their healing is free through Predatory Swiftness, and they also gain the ability to spam Cyclone, better mobility. Bear Form Frenzied Regen is still very strong. I think the defensive conduits are a little bit better as well for proccing automatic Frenzied Regeneration. They can bring in things like Convoke the Spirits for the big one-shots like Ascendance on the Enhancement Shaman, and I actually think that they rank a little bit ahead. Even though we only saw Enhancement Shaman Warrior win the tournament, we haven't seen a Feral win. It's again, I don't think it's because they can't. I think it's just Feral hasn't been in a spot where it's really able to dominate tournaments for a long time, that the best teams don't invest in Feral, right? Like, how many Method EU was Feral? When is that going to happen? When has it happened? It's just because people want to stay with what they think is good. They don't really have the time to branch out onto something, even though it may be, just in case it isn't. But I think Feral is one that is actually currently very strong. Not an S tier specialization by any means. I don't think that you can pivot any composition around it, but its synergies with the best specializations, I think, are there. And we may see it increasingly over time, or if you want to play on the ladder, you'll still have some success. Frost Death Knight is another specialization that I think falls into a niche. where it's going to be doing an incredible amount of burst damage, just damage overall. We've seen it really well with Windwalker monks, really good with arms warriors. It's kind of just the anti-cleave. It has some downsides in needing to position targets close together, but even still, because they nerfed Chill Streak, which is the spell that was limited by that range and buffed their damage overall, they actually just feel good in general. Abomination's Limb is great for just repositioning targets around. It's a solid specialization. I think that it's very fun at the moment, especially if you're running the Syndragosa Legendary to shoot a dragon out and stun multiple targets. I've been playing with the Frost Death Knight, and I haven't had specifically any complaints. It's been a good time. This is a tough one for me. Do I want to put Frost Death Knight above or below? I think that it's worthy of A plus in my mind, which then people are going to say, well, how is it better than Enhancement? Again, I think Enhancement is enabled by its synergies more than anything, whereas Frost is a standalone. I think you can play with balanced druids. It's going to be more flexible than an Enhancement Shaman, warriors, windwalkers. Maybe it's about the same as an Enhancement Shaman to me, just because it doesn't have the same personal defense. This is actually a really hard one to rank because it's a great counter pick. In some matchups, you will be almost feeling like an S tier, if not an S tier. But against things like Double Caster, you may feel even below an A tier. So it's a bit polarized in where it is. So maybe because of that, we'll drop it down slightly to A rather than A plus, just because of that difference in countered or its ability to counter other compositions. But I think it's a lot of fun and flexible at the moment, if you're wondering. Fury Warrior, I'm just going to be putting it at the bottom of the list, even though I've seen videos and TikToks of things like Bajira's Fury Warrior running around one-shotting people with maxed out Death Wish and a ton of other buffs and stuff. We've still just yet to see it in play in 3v3 or in tournament at all. It just doesn't compete. It brings the utility of arms, but it doesn't bring the Mortal Strike effect, which is very important at the moment for reducing all of the healing that is so prevalent on a lot of specs, even other than healers. And it doesn't bring anything unique that arms doesn't, on top of having a deficit in no Mortal Strike. So to me, I'm not sure what they could bring back Bloodthirst snare removal. So then it's just a really high mobility melee DPS as an honor talent that was randomly taken away from them. This potentially could enable Fury Warrior. They've been buffing its damage over time. But again, much like Assassination Rogue, it's just kind of a basic melee. I guess it does bring more in my mind because it still has Intervene and it has Spell Reflect as these kind of utility options. But it just isn't unique in how it deals damage. More of its damage profile is a little bit too basic. So even if you just buff its numbers, I don't feel like it's bringing much to the table. I mean, even Arms Warrior got Piercing Howl now, so they both have the AoE snare. I struggle to give it a high ranking in PvP at the moment, but again, if you've watched the Bajira TikToks and you want to do random battlegrounds and stack a bunch of buffs and try and kill people really fast, you'll have a good time there. But this is more or less like a competitive play tier list. So yeah, you can play it, you can have fun with it, I'm sure, in those casual environments. But when it comes to ranked 3v3, I don't think we're going to see like Bajira, for example, coming into it as Fury. He's going to be playing arms, so that's then the clear distinction. Havoc Demon Hunter, to me, this is a specialization that is just a one trick. You've got the Hunt as Night Fae. You either one shot someone with it and you don't. You do bring a lot of defense with Darkness and Automatic Darkness Legendary and Blur. You still have a lot of that extra defense and a lot of utility through purging and high mobility. I've seen some compositions on the ladder, like Shadow Priest, Demon Hunter, Shaman starting to do better, Warrior, Demon Hunter. So it's definitely got some flexibility, and it's in an all right spot, but I don't think it's in this exceedingly. It's tough. To me, I think it's about above Assassination, but that's why it's going on the left on the tier, but not enough that I would consider it an A tier specialization at the moment. It does have some flexibility playing with Shadow Priest Shaman, but even those comps aren't necessarily the best synergies at the moment in the meta. Playing with Warrior and then Resto Druid, I've seen some success on the ladder as well from players and compositions, but I don't feel like it's established as the other specializations are currently above it. Outlaw, again, it brings a reduced cooldown blind, so it brings a little bit more to the table than a Fury Warrior, but its damage is just lackluster. It also got hit hard by the Kyrian Covenant nerf to Echoing Reprimand as well as Subtlety, so it lost any potential there to try and make much happen. I'm curious to see where it goes. Again, this is likely because I just rarely see it, but I feel like there has to be a reason that we rarely see it. I'm giving it a lower ranking at this time. It's just unseen, really. I think that there is potential because its blind is such a low cooldown that it could be niche in Rogue Mage. But Subtlety just brings so much to the table, being able to stun multiple targets that Outlaw can't keep up with anymore. Now that Kidney Shot is its stun at melee range, and it doesn't have that ranged gun stun that can reduce the cooldown and maybe stun multiple targets. This is just not much to it, and it's also just unseen. Retribution Paladin, this is one that I think is currently better than Feral Druid, but I wouldn't say that it's on the S tier. I know a lot of people are going to be like, what are you talking about? They get 20k judgments. And I agree that like the Ringing Clarity conduit at the moment where you're rolling judgment lottery and you might just completely erase somebody, or maybe you sort of hurt them, isn't exactly the most entertaining. Maybe it is if you're the Rep Paladin when you get lucky on it, but it isn't really for anybody else. And it's also not fun when you don't get lucky as the Rep Paladin, I would imagine. I don't think that we're going to see a lot of comps that are pivoted around Ret. This is the main reason that I don't think it's in the S tier at the moment. You're not going to see every single spec in the game wanting to play with a Ret, but you do see pretty much every spec in the game wanting to play with an Arms Warrior. And I think it's that distinction that makes Arms Warrior S tier and Rep Paladin not S tier. Of course, it brings insane healing through Word of Glory. We've seen that on the breakdown meters of the tournament, as well as on the ladder, where Rep Paladins are keeping up with their Restoration Shamans on healing. Mind you, maybe that's because Restoration Shaman healing isn't as strong potentially, but I think that one distinction where it's not everyone wants to play with a Ret, it's that Rets again are enabled by warriors, and enabled more so in my mind than Enhancement Shaman or Feral Druid, which is why it's coming in on the left of the tier. So it's in a really good spot. As a standalone spec, it's in a really good spot as well, and it has flexibility, but it's not that spec that everyone wants to play with. It's the spec that works the best with the specs that everybody wants to play with, or one of them, right? Subtlety Rogue. This is a specialization that we see some play, but almost distinctly in Rogue Mage Priest and a little bit of Rogue Mage Paladin. It seems really cheesy in its setup windows where it's just this all-in try and kill, and if the other team knows how that all-in works and counters it, you're really not getting much done. Rogue Mage Priest is still very prevalent and successful on the ladder, though. Despite that in the tournaments, it's actually very interesting to me how the ladder feels quite a bit different than tournament realm in general. So I'm curious to see how it plays out, but I think it's still in a strong position, but not an A+. To me, it's probably the bottom of the A tiers at the moment because its ability to stun multiple targets and its synergies with Fire Mages, Paladins, and Discipline Priest, which creates such a great composition in general through the synergies of the specializations. I think that it's still in a good spot. It's not going to be over the top. It's not bringing that hybrid healing, but with the hit and run play style, the conduit when you go into stealth that gives you a shield, preventing you from being pulled out to dots, really just enables what's strong about it at the moment. And I think that in those compositions, it's still going to shine. But as a standalone, not that great. Not a spec that anyone's really looking to play with in the game other than mages and priests. And it's more or less because Subtlety is like the only melee DPS, one of the only specs in the game that can actually set up a mage by stunning multiple targets, which is what's making it desirable to the mage specifically, because its damage outside of those cooldown windows is so lackluster. Survival Hunter is another specialization which we see in Jungle Cleave pretty much exclusively, and Jungle Cleave isn't doing that great. Maybe there's some potential for some Shadow Priest. Right now, Warriors don't want to play with you, Rets don't want to play with you. Ferals will put up with you, but it's more or less because you've been friends with them for so long playing jungle. Enhancement Shamans don't know you exist. Frosty K's don't know you exist. Rogues don't care about you. Havoc Demon Hunter, maybe once in a blue moon. You're just kind of left with that niche play of jungle at the moment. I haven't seen any potential in terms of experimentation with it. And Marksman's damage burst potential, which is what's most important at the moment, is just allowing it not to really have a great position. I want to put it in B+ because in jungle, I think it is still very good, especially on the ladder. I think you'll see success on the ladder if you want to play Survival Hunter or play with a Survival Hunter, then run Discipline Priest Feral Druid. So I think it's in the B+, where it's like it's slightly above average on the B, but not so much so that I think it's defining the meta or the most desirable spec that everybody would like to be paired up with at the moment on the other specializations available in the game. But in that one composition, I have seen it do pretty gnarly stuff, the same as Assassination or Demon Hunter, which is why it's going on B+. Unholy Death Knight, this is a specialization that just got recently buffed, and I think a lot of people are wondering where it's currently residing after those buffs to its dots and to its necrotic strike. I still think that its sustained damage is just not enough to penetrate through the amount of available healing in the game on paladins and on the hybrids. You can stack necrotic strike on a healer and a stun, and then their rep paladin removes all of it and heals them to full. Okay, that was very effective. And then same to be said about their dots, right? This is why I don't think we see dots being super prevalent at the moment, which Unholy Death Knight is known for, is spreading diseases and whittling down multiple targets. Is that's countered by all the healing that's available from endurance conduits, defensive legendaries, and it's really preventing these sustained damage classes that don't have Mortal Strike from succeeding. Now, you can play with warriors and bring Mortal Strike to the table and try and play these cleave setups as Unholy. I think Frost fits better still in the meta because it brings the burst damage that is basically in demand. You can either hit a threshold of this massive burst damage or you can't. And then the specs that can are the ones that everybody wants to play with. The specs that can't fall a little bit short. So for me, I want to put Unholy Death Knight as just average, which is B. Slightly below the other Assassination, Survival, and Havoc. I'm curious if they're going to buff it anymore, or if they're going to look at healers and bring down healing in general on hybrids or DPS specs, which would then assist it, because it's this Unholy can't hit that high spike, and the sustain where it is, the healing is just above it, so you're not going to see too much. And then Frost fits into that burst spike while still doing decent sustain. It's not like Frost sustain is awful anymore. So it's just Frost is going to be a lot more prevalent, which in my mind makes Unholy just average. And then finally, Windwalker Monk, and it was kind of a battle between, I feel like a lot of players at the moment deciding, like, is Arms Warrior actually the thing that's the best? Is Windwalker the best? I think they're both equally on the same tier. Mostly, again, because if you think about it, everybody wants to play with you. Rets want to play with you. I think even Ferals want to play with you. Enhance want to play with you. Frosty can want to play with you. I mean, Subtlety probably, maybe, who knows. Havoc Demon Hunter probably wants to play with you. Assassination, maybe it could, it couldn't. I mean, you could even try Survival Windwalker, Unholy Windwalker, like Wind Fury Windwalker. You're bringing the burst thresholds. The main reason that it's so good is because you have multiple charges of your burst damage. Storm, Earth, and Fire, multiple charges. Zwen, so you basically have these 3 cooldowns to rotate through on their own cooldown. So and they're all threatening to the point where you could win the game with them. So the other team has to respond with a cooldown or crowd control you appropriately at so many frequent points that it's not possible. So you eventually get windows where you create these huge swings of momentum and damage. And because you have so many cooldowns, it's actually making your sustained damage quite high as well, because it's just cooldowns are active all the time and your cooldown damage is really good. I mean, we even saw Windwalkers doing more damage than Warrior, which I wasn't certain that they could, but it definitely is possible. So I think that they directly compete with Warrior on the same tier based on their desirability, their flexibility, their overall performance, their strength, their toolkits, their utility, right? Things like Ring of Peace, Paralyze getting a shorter cooldown, instant healing like Expel Harm to assist your allies, Grapple Weapon to remove melee DPS attackers, abilities to finish people off, having an Execute that is actually just a flat out execute on Touch of Death when you get a target incredibly low is very good at the moment with how high burst damage is. It's just, I think it's in a great spot. Now, you could say its passive mitigation is weaker than Arms Warrior, right? And you're going to need to be very aware of your cooldown management, in my mind, to be able to survive a lot of burst attacks and your mobility. So it could be more challenging in that sense than an Arms Warrior, but I don't think that has impact on its current power level, right? Like it's just because it's slightly harder to play in one aspect doesn't mean that it's worse than the spec. It just means that that's more challenging on it, as I'm sure there are things more challenging for Arms Warrior to accomplish based on the way that its toolkit is designed. So I think that they're still about the same in the S tier currently, and this is my assessment after a few months now of Shadowlands, from the ladder, my assessment from the tournament, and from all the changes that have been happening. So I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, please leave it with a thumbs up. Comment down below with your thoughts on where you think the specializations currently sit in PvP, because again, this is just to be a general resource for anybody coming in and wanting to be like, oh, what's doing well right now? What should I pick up? Maybe I'm on an alt or something. That's the main purpose of this. And maybe to bring light as well to some of the weaknesses or strengths of the specializations or synergies as well. Other than that, subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free. It just lets you know when my videos go live. And thank you very much for watching. I will see you in the next one.